answer because it provides us with no information. We always have to rely on science to provide us with the real answers. So, for example, when humans didn't know what caused lightning, we invented a god of lightning, and then science discovered electricity. In fact, God of the Gaps is the basis of the intelligent design movement. It says this thing is so complicated that we can't figure out how it could have evolved naturally, so God did it. God of the Gaps is also used in medicine. When someone is healed for reasons we don't understand, some people say God did it. But if prayer and divine intervention were really reliable methods of healing, there would be no need for hospitals. A true miracle, like an amputated limb growing back on a human, never happens. A lot of people wonder how we can be ethical without a God. This is an entire debate unto itself, and I just did it last week in Duluth, as a matter of fact, and I'd be happy to come back and do it again. But let me answer it briefly. Do we get our ethics from a God or a religion? Well, the fact is that even within Christianity, there's no agreement on the ethics of such things as drinking alcohol, masturbation, premarital sex, contraception, abortion, embryonic stem cell research, divorce, the role of women, gay rights, the death penalty, voluntary euthanasia, and when and if we should go to war. So if we don't really get our ethics from gods or religions, where do we get them? Imagine a mother with 2 children, and the girl starts hitting the boy. Does the mother reflexively say to her daughter, "Stop hitting your brother, because it says not to in the Torah, Bible, Vedas, Quran"? No. At that point, gods and religions are the furthest thing from her mind. Well, what does the mother say? She says things like, stop hitting your brother, you're hurting him. That's consequences. Or, stop hitting your brother, how would you like it if someone hit you? And that's empathy. Consequences and empathy are the basis for natural ethics. These lead to cooperation and compassion, which are found in many animals, including humans. There are many examples of cooperation and helpfulness that I could give in non-human animals, which would beg the question, if you believe good behavior can only come from a God, which God are these animals believing in? But let me give an even more convincing example. When a petri dish full of bacteria is exposed to antibiotics, a small number of resistant bacteria sacrifice some of their own growth to help out their less resistant fellow bacteria. Does anyone here believe that God is instructing these bacteria to help out their neighbors? Our ethics are human-made, guided by our evolution as social beings. We sometimes attribute our ethics to a God so that a God can act as an invisible policeman. But if you try to base your ethics on God belief and you later lose your God belief, well then you've lost your basis for ethics. But if you base your ethics on the natural world, evolution, consequences, empathy, then it doesn't matter if you believe in a God or not. You can lose your supernatural belief, but you can't lose the natural world. Some people ask, without a God, how do we get meaning and purpose in our lives? Well, evolution supplies us with drives to survive, reproduce, have sex, and to care about future generations. To accomplish this, we acquire knowledge and live in cooperative communities. Thinking, learning, and interacting with other people gives our lives meaning and purpose, without the need for belief in any gods. Now, some religious people have an emotional desire to have a cosmic meaning in life. Well, since nature doesn't provide one, some people invent a God to give them one. Yet, just like the atheist, these religious people are creating their own meaning in life. They're simply adding the step of inventing a middleman. A lot of religious people make the mistake of confusing 2 types of laws, descriptive laws and prescriptive laws. Laws of nature are merely descriptions of our observations. For example, we observe how fast an object accelerates as it falls, and we come up with an equation to describe it. How fast a falling object accelerates is not controlled by an invisible being, it's controlled by gravity. On another planet with more or less gravity, acceleration would be different and we'd have a different equation. The law of gravity is merely an observation, not a dictate from on high. Now contrast this with a prescriptive law that we humans might pass, such as the speed limit on a road. There's nothing intrinsic about a stretch of highway that dictates how fast cars should drive on it. The speed limit is a law that's a human invention and would not exist without us to create it. Another mistake religious people often make is misunderstanding what randomness is. Their object is to suppose that under atheism, everything is random, then to observe that most things are not random, and then to insert, without evidence, their God into the equation, a God of the gaps. But nature is full of examples of things that aren't random, and yet are not guided by any consciousness. Let me give a simple example. If the wind blows a boulder off a mountaintop and it rolls down a ravine in the mountainside to the bottom, its path will not be random, but rather its path will fall within the boundaries of the ravine. There's no reason to assume that there are invisible beings guiding the boulder down the ravine. Gravity, electricity, chemical reactions, these are not random either, but neither are they directed by invisible beings. In a different universe, these things may act differently. Snowflakes have the illusion of design, but does anyone here really believe that there's an invisible being handcrafting each and every one? Some people believe that a God necessarily exists as a first cause for the universe. Well, right away we can recognize this as a God of the gaps argument. We don't know what this God is, and we're not told what mechanism this God used to create something from nothing. Therefore, God has not provided us with any information. Furthermore, most people's claims for this God, that it created something from nothing, that it created everything in the universe, that it monitors everything in the universe, and can miraculously change anything in the universe, make this God far more complex than the universe itself. So if the universe is in need of a creator, then there's an even greater need for this God to have a creator. So despite the lack of evidence and all the unanswered questions about gods and all the problems and contradictions that arise from God belief, why do some people still believe? Well, first let's examine whether belief in a God is mainly rational or mainly emotional. If you believe in a God, think of all your reasons for belief. Now imagine a natural explanation could be found for everything you believe. Would you still believe in a God? For most believers, the answer would be yes. So strip away all the after-the-fact, unsupported logical reasons for belief, and what you're left with is raw emotion. People naturally seek emotional security during uncertain or troubled times. We've all heard the phrase, "I had nowhere else to turn, so I turned to God." It's emotionally comforting to believe that we're created in the image of a God, that a God cares about us, but wishing doesn't make it so. God belief may have a placebo, calming, supportive effect, but it's the belief that's responsible. A God doesn't really have to exist. When you're feeling helpless, when you live in a country with an insufficient or non-existent social safety net, it's not surprising that in desperation you might turn to an invisible being for help. And we tend to remember the hits, the so-called answered prayers, and overlook the misses. But if prayer actually worked, 911 would be a dial-up prayer service. Instead, 911 directs you to humans helping each other. The reason we have to do the Lord's work is because the Lord isn't doing it himself. And if we're doing the work, shouldn't we take the credit? Another way in which some people believe a God intervenes is to provide us with an afterlife. Our survival instincts make us want to live forever. Nature doesn't provide for this, so some people invent a God to give them an afterlife. Some people also want an afterlife as a place where final justice can occur. But again, wishing doesn't make it so. The fact is, most religious people don't primarily care about God. Imagine if you had to choose between a God existing, but there's no afterlife, or there is an afterlife, but there's no God. Which one would you choose? Well, most people anyway, would choose the afterlife. And this makes sense because it fulfills our survival instincts. Well, emotional support is a good thing, but with God belief, it comes with a heavy price tag. Usually people who believe a God exists, that is providing them with answers to their prayers in an afterlife, dare not displease this God. So they ascribe to him all the best attributes and blame themselves or their lack of belief for anything that goes wrong. They're also sometimes afraid to contradict primitive moral and scientific teachings that are attributed to this God, but which do harm to society. Too often, religions not only offer emotional support, but they cripple you in the first place and then offer themselves as a crutch. Many religions teach ideas such as, you are inherently bad, and you need a God to fix that. That without a God, your life will be empty and without purpose. That without a God, you will have no basis for ethics. That life without an afterlife is meaningless. All of these are lies. Atheism, religious belief, is primarily an accident of birth and geography. It's time for humanity to throw aside the crutches of God belief and religion and rise up on our own. Ultimately, we can figure out much more meaningful lives for ourselves, lives that correspond to our observations of nature, lives that have ethics based on ethics, and ethics that are based on empathy and consequences, and lives that derive value from ourselves and one another, and not some mysterious, invisible force. It's more difficult than having simple answers handed to you from people who lived in primitive times, but for most of us, it's more rewarding. Thank you.